All right, let's dive into the world of inventory control. We've got this really interesting guide here all about interview questions and answers for like aspiring inventory controllers. We really want to kind of unpack what it takes to excel in this field,
Yeah.
going beyond just counting boxes, right?
It's funny you should say that because it really is a field that I think a lot of people don't realize, like how important it is to companies to have somebody really good in that role. And this guide, I think, does a really good job of kind of giving us a roadmap for really seeing what it takes to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the first things that jumps out to me is the emphasis on accuracy. They really hammer this home, like accurate inventory counts are like the bedrock of the whole system.
Mhm.
And they mention strategies like cycle counting, using barcodes and scanners, even good old-fashioned audits.
Yeah, it's kind of like I always imagine it's like if you're building a house, right? You got to have a solid foundation.
Mm.
If your foundation's all messed up, you know, the whole structure's going to be compromised. And so accurate inventory counts are kind of like the foundation of all your inventory decisions. So each of these methods is really a way to make sure that that foundation is solid.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And what I found interesting is they even mentioned, something as simple as using an Excel spreadsheet for inventory control. You wouldn't think something so basic could be effective, but it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, especially for maybe smaller businesses or those that have maybe a more simple inventory. Having a spreadsheet, if you structure it correctly, it can be surprisingly powerful. I remember working with a small bookstore a few years back, and that's exactly what they were using, and it worked really well for them.
Hmm, interesting. So the guide then gets into the challenge of reconciling your physical inventory with your digital records.
Yeah.
And one question asks, what would you do if there's a sudden unexpected drop in inventory levels? Like you got to put on your detective hat at that point.
Absolutely. There's a little bit of an investigative element to this role, and you got to figure out. Could be shrinkage, could be theft, could be damage, could even just be a miscount. I once worked with a clothing retailer, and they were having huge problems with shoplifting, and that was leading to significant losses for them. And so we put into place a combination of security measures and more frequent cycle counts, and it really helped to cut down on that problem drastically.
It seems like those cycle counts are a real workhorse in inventory control.
Yeah, they really are. Because if you're regularly going through and checking even a small portion of your inventory, you can catch those discrepancies early before they become a much larger problem.
Proactive approach, yeah. Now let's talk forecasting, because this guide specifically asks about forecasting experience. You
Not
gotta be
like
able
me.
to predict the future, right?
Yeah. Well, not really crystal ball stuff, but it's more about looking at patterns and trends and understanding those. A really skilled inventory controller can look at historical data, consider, market trends, customer feedback, and use all that information to try to get a sense of what the future demand's going to be.
They give this interesting example of like a new law creating massive demand for a specific product. Remember back when those energy efficient light bulbs first came out, everybody had to switch from the incandescent ones. But somebody made a killing off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to anticipate those shifts in demand can really make or break a business. Another good example is just like the rise of online shopping. Companies that were able to adapt and change their inventory strategies
Sure.
really flourished, right? While those who kind of clung to those old ways of doing things really struggled to keep up.
So it's not just about knowing what you have now, but knowing what people are going to want, down the line.
Exactly. You got to have that forward-thinking mindset. Allows businesses to capitalize on opportunities, but also avoid those costly consequences that can come from, running out of stock on something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Speaking of costly consequences, let's shift gears a bit to the problem of shrinkage. The source calls it the silent thief. And for good reason, right? It can really eat away at those profits. And they break it down. The causes theft, damage, incorrect pricing, even simple admin errors can lead to shrinkage.
And it really is a bigger problem than a lot of people realize. I think the National Retail Federation actually estimates that shrinkage costs retailers billions of dollars every year. So it's definitely something that any business that carries inventory really needs to be mindful of.
Yeah, for sure. And they suggest a kind of multi-pronged approach to combat this.
Yeah.
Things like security cameras, RFID tags.
hmm All that's important, but I think maybe even more important is having a culture of accountability and accuracy within your business. So that means really investing in employee training, having clear procedures, and really promoting open communication. Because even the most high-tech security system can't account for human error or
Well,
negligence, right?
so it's not just about the gadgets, it's about having the right people and processes in place.
Exactly. The technology can help, but it's only as good as the people using it.
Makes sense. This guide also dives into the concept of just-in-time inventory, which is kind of like walking a tightrope, right?
Yeah.
Getting goods only as you need them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely appealing on the surface. You think about reduced storage costs, you have less waste, better cash flow, but it's not without risks.
Like, what if there's like a sudden disruption in the supply chain?
Exactly. So let's say a key supplier suddenly goes on strike, or there's a natural disaster that disrupts your transportation routes. If you're operating on that just-in-time model, you could find yourself in a really tricky situation. You could have production delays, lost sales, all sorts of problems.
So the choice of software for managing this type of system seems incredibly important.
Oh, absolutely. You need a system that gives you real-time visibility into your inventory levels, can track your orders precisely, and can adapt to those unexpected changes. So the technical side of inventory control is a huge piece of making that just-in-time model work effectively.
So even though it's called just-in-time, it seems like you actually need to be thinking way ahead of time to make it work.
Exactly, yeah. You got to be thinking ahead, planning meticulously, forecasting accurately, and you got to have really strong relationships with your suppliers.
Yeah, it's a lot more complex than it sounds on the surface.
It definitely is, yeah.
So the last point I want to touch on before we move on is this idea that measuring effectiveness in inventory control goes beyond just counting. The guide highlights these key metrics: inventory accuracy, stock turnover rate, and order fill rates.
hmm Yeah, you can almost think of these metrics as like vital signs for your inventory, right? So inventory accuracy tells you how well your records are matching up with reality. Your stock turnover rate measures how quickly you're selling your inventory. And your order fill rate is basically tracking how often you're able to fulfill those customer orders completely. So taken together, these metrics really paint a picture of how efficiently you're managing your inventory.
Like a doctor checking your pulse, blood pressure, and temperature.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to get a sense of overall well-being.
So by tracking these metrics, you can then identify areas for improvement and make adjustments, right?
Exactly. You can see where you're excelling, maybe where you need to focus a little more attention, and ultimately just improve your overall inventory performance.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already. And it's amazing how much depth there is to this field. We've gone from counting boxes to predicting the future to battling shrinkage
Yeah.
to navigating complex software systems.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface, really.
There's so much more to explore in terms of the challenges, the strategies, the nuances of inventory control.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll be right back after a quick break to delve even deeper into those.
Sounds good. So, we've laid some groundwork here, like understanding those key principles of inventory control. But let's kind of look at some more real-world scenarios, right? Like, how does a skilled inventory controller really tackle those day-to-day challenges?
Yeah, and this guide doesn't shy away from the tricky stuff. One question asks how you'd handle a discrepancy between what was ordered and what was actually received from a supplier. Like, I feel like that could happen all the time.
Oh, it does. It definitely does. Sometimes it's an honest mistake, a miscount. Sometimes it's damaged goods or even like the wrong items completely.
Wow, okay, so the source suggests a really systematic approach. First contact the supplier, then you got to dig into the invoices, order history records, like more detective work.
It is, yeah. Documentation is key here. You need a clear paper trail so you can pinpoint exactly where the error occurred. Was it a typo on the order form, a problem with the packing slip at the supplier's end, maybe something happened in transit? Each possibility kind of requires a different course of action.
And I imagine communication skills are pretty key here, too. You're not just dealing with numbers, you're dealing with people.
Oh, absolutely. Being able to clearly articulate the problem, listen to the supplier's side of things, and work collaboratively towards a solution is essential. Sometimes it's an easy fix. Sometimes it takes a little bit of, negotiation and compromise.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question that stood out to me was about tracking expiration dates, especially for perishable items. Like, I hadn't even really thought about that aspect of inventory control.
Yeah, that's a critical one, especially for businesses that are dealing with, food, pharmaceuticals, anything with a limited shelf life. The consequences of selling expired products can be pretty serious. You have financial losses, potential legal issues, damage to your reputation.
Yeah, for sure. And they mentioned both manual and computerized methods for tracking these dates. So like good old-fashioned spreadsheet versus, some high-tech software.
Yeah, and it really depends on the scale of your operation, right? If you're a small bakery with a handful of ingredients, a well-maintained spreadsheet might be enough. But if you're a big grocery chain with thousands of perishable items, you definitely need a more sophisticated system. Something that can, like, scan barcodes to update expiration dates automatically, maybe send alerts when items are getting close to expiring, and even prioritize selling those older items first.
That's a lot to keep track of. And then there's the whole issue of hazardous materials. That just seems like a whole other level of responsibility.
It is, yeah. I mean, you're not just talking about keeping things organized. It's about safety and compliance.
Hmm.
Hazardous materials require specialized knowledge, really strict adherence to safety protocols, and of course, meticulous record keeping.
The guide mentions things like protective gear, proper lifting techniques, even making sure everything is stored correctly to minimize risk. It's like a whole science in itself.
It really is. You got to understand the properties of each material, the potential risks, all the regulations. There's really no room for error when you're dealing with this stuff.
For sure. There's also a question about handling customer returns, especially if an item's been damaged or tampered with. That's going to be tricky to navigate.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. You got to take care of the customer, make sure they're happy, but you also have to protect the company's interests.
So I guess it's about figuring out, is it a manufacturing defect, damage during shipping, or something that happened after the customer received it?
Exactly. And this is where those detective skills come in handy again. You got to retrace the item's journey, look at the packaging, gather as much information as possible to try to figure out what happened.
So many hats to wear as an inventory controller, detective, diplomat, safety officer.
And let's not forget data analyst. This guide really emphasizes the importance of, constantly trying to improve your inventory management process.
Yeah, they talk about analyzing data, researching industry trends, getting feedback from different departments. Like, never stop learning, right?
Continuous improvement, that's the name of the game. A good inventory controller is always asking, how can we do this better? Can we streamline our processes? Are we using the right tech? Are there new trends we need to be aware of?
So it's like inventory control is a living, breathing system that's constantly evolving.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so dynamic and engaging. It's not about, just mindlessly counting things or plugging in data. It's about problem solving, thinking strategically, using data to make good decisions.
I like that. We've talked about those hard skills,
Yeah.
the technical stuff, the problem solving. But this guide also brings up the importance of what some people call those softer skills.
Right, right. And those can be just as important, maybe even more so in some cases. It's not enough to just be good with numbers. You got to be good with people, too.
Yeah, absolutely. One question actually focuses on managing those vendor relationships, even
Yeah.
negotiating contracts. It's like you're building a network.
Yeah, it's all about building those relationships. You and your suppliers got to be able to work together, keep that inventory flowing smoothly. So building those strong relationships, based on trust, mutual respect, that can lead to better pricing, more reliable deliveries, maybe even early access to new products or technologies.
Interesting. The source even mentions researching comparable prices, considering payment terms. Like, you need to be a negotiator.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Effective negotiation is about finding that win-win, right? It's not about trying to squeeze your supplier for every last penny. It's about coming to an agreement that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, makes sense. There's also a question about staying informed about new products and technologies. It's like inventory control never stands still, right?
It doesn't, and that's what keeps it interesting. There's always something new to learn. New software, new automation technologies, even just like shifts in consumer behavior. A good inventory controller needs to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, always learning. They mentioned attending industry conferences, reading trade publications, networking with colleagues. Sounds like lifelong learning is essential.
It is. A curious mind is a huge asset in this field. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to adapt to those changes, anticipate challenges, and identify opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, love that. And lastly, the guide asks about identifying areas for improvement in existing inventory systems, almost like they expect you to come in and challenge the status quo.
Right, and that's a good thing. You should come in with fresh eyes, analyze the data, talk to people in different departments, and don't be afraid to suggest new approaches.
They suggest researching industry trends, analyzing data, a lot of critical thinking involved.
It is. It's about being proactive, not reactive. Don't just wait for problems to pop up. Look for ways to make things better. Streamline processes, reduce waste, improve efficiency.
So big picture, what have we learned from this deep dive into inventory control? It's way more than just counting boxes, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's a dynamic field that blends technical expertise, analytical skills, and those all-important soft skills. It's about accuracy, efficiency, problem solving, continuous improvement.
It's about being a detective, a negotiator, a tech enthusiast, a data analyst, a team player, all rolled into one.
Exactly. And I think maybe most importantly, it's about understanding just how crucial inventory control is to a company's success. It really is the backbone of the supply chain, making sure that the right products are available at the right time.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We went from the basics of counting to the complexities of forecasting, managing vendors, dealing with shrinkage.
And we've seen how a role that might seem kind of behind the scenes can actually be really dynamic, challenging, requiring a lot of different skills, and that constant desire to learn and grow.
So to wrap things up, as you continue to explore the world of inventory control, think about what aspects of this role really resonate with you. What skills do you already have, and which ones might you need to develop?
The learning never stops.
Exactly. Stay curious, stay informed, and never underestimate the power of a well-managed inventory.
Well said.
That's it for our deep dive into the world of inventory control. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.